So, managing human resources and labor relations. This really could be two chapters, but we don't have an extra week. So we're going to cover mostly the HR part of it today and the labor relations or union part of it on Thursday for the most part. So this is what we're going to cover in this chapter. What is the human resource management process? I mean, what does it mean to manage human resources? So we'll learn about that. How do you figure out what human resources you need in your organization? How many people, what jobs they have to do, all that kind of thing. How do you then recruit people to work for your organization? How do you select which are the best candidates? How do you train them and develop them? And what's the difference between training and developing? We'll talk about that. Let's see what else. Performance appraisals. How do you measure an employee's performance to determine if they're doing a good job? How do you compensate people fairly? What is a labor union? What is collective bargaining? That's what labor unions do, where they bargain on behalf of the individual workers. I'll give you an example about that because we went through a big collective bargaining experience here at Hartnell last year. We'll talk about grievances. If you are part of a union and you're unhappy about something with the company, the union has your back. So how does that process work of getting that grievance resolved? We'll look at some of the different laws and the federal agencies that deal with employment and labor relations. And we'll look at trends in the industry. Okay, so a lot to cover this week. Looking at this picture, what do you think is going on here? What would you guess is happening?
Working on power lines.
Yeah, they're working on power lines or phone lines, right? But why so many people in such a small space?
Training?
Exactly. They must be going through training, right? Because you don't see that many, you know.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
It's such a compact collection. So yeah, these people must be getting trained. Either they're new employees being taught how to do this for the first time, or it's some maybe ongoing training just to brush up their skills. So yeah, and that's a big part of human resources is training. Oh, okay. So again, we're going to get into more detail on unions on Thursday, but just a little bit. In 2006, long before I came to Hartnell, because I've only been here 5 years, but in 2006, the faculty who were here and the board of trustees that runs the entire college district could not agree on the new contract. The pay was part of the issue, and I'm sure there were some other concerns that the faculty and the board could not agree on, and the faculty eventually went on strike, and you see them here picketing, which is something you often do before you go on strike, but also while you're on strike, you might go out there with a picket to bring attention to your cause. Well, last year, we did not go on strike, but we thought we were going to have to, and we did end up picketing, we being the faculty members. You can see one of our organizing activities with a bunch of our faculty members showing solidarity, showing up to say, hey, you know, board, you need to listen to us.
Oh, the photos on the left, were they from 2006?
Yes, these are from 2006, and this one's from last year.
Oh.
Yeah, and there's some more, but I guess we'll get to those probably on Thursday. Yeah, so it's, yeah, these are not very good quality pictures. They're probably taken with an old film camera that was not, you know, very high quality. Whereas you can see this is more recent. So we'll get to unions on Thursday. Fortunately, though, this time we did not go on strike. Things got resolved. The board actually ended up providing everything we were asking for, basically. When they came back, finally with their offer, you're like, wow, okay. You're really gonna offer us exactly what we wanted? Okay, great. Why were we fighting for the last, 6 to 8 months? So it worked out well, but we'll talk more about that on Thursday. Okay.
2006, Windows XP was around.
Windows XP, yeah, I remember those days, yeah. Okay, so the human resource management process. Remember how we learned about how organizations should know what their vision is and their mission, right? They should have a clear understanding of why they're in business, and that their entire strategy, their long-term plan, should work towards that mission and that vision, right? Well, it's important for HR to also be working towards that same mission, vision, and strategy, right? Your HR department, just like any other department in the organization, has to be focused on the company's long-term goals. So that's where you start. And the people in the human resources department, they need to figure out what jobs need to be done. They need to do an analysis and say, okay, well, our company makes candy bars, so we need some people who know how to make candy bars, right? And we need people that know how to do the accounting. And we need people that know how to do the sales and the marketing. And figure out who do we need in this company and what skills they're going to need. And how many people. So once you know that, and by the way, that keeps changing, but you keep adapting as it changes, then you start recruiting employees. Where do you find people to come work for your company, right? Once you find some people that want to work for your company, well, you don't hire everybody, you hire the ones that you think are the best fit. How do you select the right employees? Then you have to train them. Some of them you want to develop them so that they can become supervisors or take on expanded roles. You need to evaluate if they are meeting the performance expectations. And by the way, a lot of these HR tasks are done together with the managers of the individual departments. So it might be, if there's a factory that makes the candy bars, it might be the supervisor of the factory that evaluates the performance of the employees in the factory. But HR helps that supervisor know how to do that. So it's really a collaboration between HR and the managers throughout the company. HR also has to figure out how much each employee should be paid and what kind of other benefits they should get, like health insurance. Should they get health insurance or not? That's a decision the company has to make. And then hopefully all these decisions lead to the desired outcomes. Meaning you have a company that is effective and efficient, making its product, people are buying the product, everybody's happy, and the company's growing, right? But it doesn't end there, because you always have people leaving the organization for one reason or another. Got fired, they quit, whatever it might be. You always have the question of, do we need more people or do we have too many people? So you're always having to adjust. This is what the HR management process is like. So if you think about people that work in human resources, they're dealing with all these different types of issues. If anybody's interested in going into human resources as a field, one really good thing about human resources as a field, as a career, is pretty much every company has a human resources department. If it's a small company, maybe not, but most companies have a department for human resources. So maybe you're working in human resources, let's say in the oil industry, but then the oil industry goes through a hard time because people stop buying oil. So you shift over to any other industry. You're going to find companies with HR departments. So you can take those same skills and go to any other industry and find job opportunities. You don't have to stick with one industry. Same thing with accounting. That would be another example where you could be an accountant. If you're an accountant in one company, you could go be an accountant really in any company. So that's generally what human resources is all about. Does anyone have questions or comments? So we're going to go through each of these different steps, starting with job analysis. As I mentioned already, that's figuring out what jobs need to be done and how many people do you need to do them. Once you figure that out, you should have a job description for each job. Now, a big part of the role of human resources is legal compliance, okay? We often think of human resources as the place where employees can go if they have a problem, and that is true. If you have a complaint about your boss, if you feel like you're not being paid fairly, whatever, HR, will be a good place for you to go and get some support. But that's not really the role of HR. Their real role is to make sure that the company is following the laws related to employment and is not getting sued for discrimination or anything else related to employment. That's really the main reason they're there, is to protect the company, not to protect the employee.
Okay.
And if anybody has ever gone to HR and found that they didn't seem to really have your back, unfortunately, that's sometimes the case, right? Sometimes they will, sometimes they'll advocate for the employee and try to make sure that your needs are met. But sometimes it's like, they're just there to protect the company. So just be aware of their real role. And let's see. So then the job description outlines each particular job. Let's look at an example. Have you ever searched for a job? If you've ever been in the job market and you're looking online, and every job will have a description because you have to know what job it is you're applying for, right? Some of them are short, but this would be a typical sort of job description where it tells you the title of the position. Sometimes it tells you who you would report to, where it's located, because you need to know if you're going to apply for the job where you'd be working, a summary of the job, but then more specific responsibilities. So you know exactly what would be expected of you. As I mentioned, this is done in large part for legal reasons. Because if you get hired by a company for a job, and then they start asking you or telling you to do things that were not what you were hired to do, you could make a complaint to the labor department. You could maybe sue the company and say that they're discriminating against you. And even if that's not true, that causes a lot of problems for the company legally, right? So by making it clear what you're going to be expected to do in this job, they're protecting themselves by saying, this is what you're going to do in this job. And you know that because you applied for the job. Now, there's a part also here called the job qualifications. For some reason, they usually put that at the end. Anytime I've looked for jobs in the past, I found that annoying. It's like, I want to know the qualifications right away, because if I'm not qualified, why am I going to read through the rest of this stuff? I'll just skip it. Although sometimes you might have some of the qualifications for a job, but not all of them. And sometimes if you apply, you'll get the job anyways, if they think you're a good candidate. So But if you know that, hey, they're looking for somebody that speaks, Polish and Chinese and English, and you don't speak those other languages, then why even apply, right? It wouldn't make sense. So to me, I think the qualifications should be at the top, but they're usually at the bottom. So you have to scroll down and you have to say, okay, what is it they're looking for? Do I have these qualifications? And again, this is for communicating to the job seeker, but also for protecting the company. There was just about a week ago, I heard that the jazz band director has been out sick and that they're looking for somebody to fill in for him. And I have a degree in music, I know a lot about jazz, and I could probably do it. And I have a doctorate degree as well, although it's not in music. And I mentioned this to one of my colleagues in the music department. And he said, yeah, but you have to have a master's degree in business in order to be a substitute. So that was a qualification. I mean, I would have just done it like 1 or 2 times. It wouldn't be a permanent thing. But Hartnell is very specific. If I were going to be out sick or for any reason on vacation or something, and I brought in a substitute, there are certain qualifications they would need in order to be able to be here as a substitute. And that way, if, for example, as students, you said, hey, this person came in and I don't think that they were qualified to be there, and I'm going to sue the school because they brought in, some unqualified person, they could go back to their record and say, no, this person met our qualifications. They had, a valid right to be there. Okay, so anyways, that's job descriptions. And the job specification is usually referred to as the qualifications for the job. Okay, any questions or comments at this point? Time to check here. Okay, I think that's a good place to pause. Yeah, let's pause.
Yeah, we don't want Hartnell to get sued.
No, that would not be good. This is where we'll pick it up. Okay. So once a company has identified their strategy, human resource, again, everything human resources does should support that strategy, right? So that involves figuring out what jobs need to be done in the company. That's the job analysis we talked about previously. And then looking at, do we need more employees or not, based on how many employees we have and how many we think we will need in the future. So it's a constant requirement that you're always looking towards the future. And if your company is growing, you're probably going to need more employees, right? And if your company is having financial troubles, you might be trying to get rid of employees. It sounds terrible, not get rid of them like, have them shot or anything like that, right? But just have them not be employees anymore. And unfortunately, that's also part of HR, is laying people off, in some cases firing people. So you're constantly comparing how many employees you have and how many you think you will be needing in the future. So based on whatever that difference is, if you have too many workers, then these are some different steps you can take. And if you don't have enough workers, these are some things you could do. So let's start over here. If you have a surplus with too many employees, you might be able to move people from one department to another department that needs more help and say, okay, we really don't need you doing this job anymore, but would you be interested in doing this job over here? So that might be a way to address some of that surplus. Companies sometimes lay people off. You could just tell people, hey, you're doing a good job, but right now we just can't afford to keep you here any longer. So we're gonna have to let you go for now. Maybe we'll hire you back at some point in the future. And that's a layoff. The employee can usually then go and collect unemployment compensation while they're looking for a new job, at least for a couple months. And it's not a pleasant experience. Sometimes the employer will pay a bonus to the employee and say, because we have to lay you off, we're going to give you a couple months worth of pay, just as a departing gift to make it a little easier. Or the employer might say, we're gonna have to let you go, but we're gonna help train you for other work. So it'll help you find jobs with other companies. There are different things you can do, but unfortunately, companies do sometimes lay people off. In HR, they use this word terminate. That's another word I don't think sounds very nice, to terminate an employee. It means to terminate the employment, end the employment relationship. In other words, it's a nice, maybe not nice, it's just a different way of saying to fire somebody, is to terminate the employment. And usually, that's very different from a layoff. A layoff is because the company can't afford you right now. If you're terminated, it's usually because you've done something wrong. If a company fires you and they don't have a valid reason for doing so, that opens them up to a potential lawsuit. Because you could come back and say, wait a minute, why did you fire me and you didn't fire this other person that's a total slacker? You should have fired them. And you might have a legal case where even if you don't win, the company has to go to court and defend itself, and they don't want to do all that. So when an employer does fire somebody, usually they have a well-documented reason of what the employee did that caused them to get fired, so that they can defend themselves legally. And another thing that they can do if they have too many workers is encourage some of their workers to retire. So you might say, hey, we know, you're only 60 years old, but if you retire now, we will give you a year's worth of pay, or we'll let you keep your health insurance benefits for 5 years, something like that, to make it so that some of the employees that are getting close to retirement might go ahead and retire. And that might actually save the company some money. So these are some of the most common things companies do if they have a surplus of workers. Any questions on that? Any comments? So what if you don't have enough workers? Well, then you can hire some people, right? That takes a while though. And if you hire the wrong people, then it's hard to get rid of them sometimes. So another option, you could pay your existing workers overtime. So anybody who's hourly, federal law says that if you work more than 40 hours a week, you need to be paid 50% more, so time and a half for any additional hours beyond 40 hours. There are some exceptions to that, but if you're hourly, that's usually the case, and that's a federal law. But under California state law, if you work more than 8 hours in any one day, that also means you should get paid 50% more for that overtime. So companies can do it. It's kind of expensive because it increases their labor cost, but it might be cheaper and quicker than hiring new people. So you just get your existing employees to work more hours. That would be one option. And then another would be to subcontract. What do you all think is meant by that? How would you subcontract employment? Yeah. Yeah, you could call up a staffing agency, an employment company, and say, hey, we need 10 workers tomorrow. You have people? Maybe, sure. We'll send 10 people over tomorrow. What qualifications do they need? How much are they going to get paid? And then they make the arrangements. usually the way that works is those temporary workers that you just got through the employment agency are technically employees of the employment agency. And the employment agency is your contractor. So you have a contract with this company to bring you these workers. And then if you don't like any of those workers, they're not your employees. So you don't have to fire them. You just call up the employment agency and say, hey, tell Brenda, I just came up with that name, tell Brenda not to come back tomorrow. And they're the ones that have to fire Brenda, not you. It makes it easy for companies to hire people quickly, although technically they're not hiring them. And then the ones that do work out, they can say, okay, we would like you to come work for us directly. And then they have an arrangement with the employment agency to convert that worker from a temporary contract employee to a regular direct employee. So that is an option. Okay. This is what HR works on. Any questions or comments? All right, so if you're trying to recruit workers, there are two basic sources. You can recruit people from inside your company or from outside the company. So let's say you've got a supervisor position open. You could promote somebody that already works in your company into that role, or you could bring in somebody from the outside. Let's think about that for a second. If you've got a supervisor opening, would it be better to promote somebody or hire from the outside? How many people say promote somebody? 8, 9, 10. Okay, how many people say hire from the outside would be better?
It depends.
It depends. Ooh, okay, Karina, why does it depend?
Because normally you have people in your company, but it doesn't fit.
Okay.
Even you try to propose them, they don't have enough knowledge to go. It's depend of the work.
It depends is often the best answer in a business class because businesses are complex. It does depend. If you've got workers that have supervisory potential, it's great to promote one of them, and then it's going to create increased motivation for them because they got promoted. Maybe their coworkers will support it. Maybe their coworkers will be jealous. It kind of depends on the environment. But if you do that, then now that person is no longer a worker. You're still going to have to hire somebody to take their job, right? That they just got promoted out of. So there are some benefits, but also some downsides to promoting from within. Bringing in somebody from the outside, the benefit there is you get somebody with a new perspective because they're coming from a different company and have a different way of looking at things. And that might be beneficial. Plus, they might already have supervisory experience, whereas the person you promoted didn't, right? So it does depend. Okay. How can you recruit applicants? A lot of that is done online, right? Indeed, LinkedIn, ZipRecruiter, these are some of the big job boards that are out there today. But there are other ways. You could do it through networking, through getting referrals, job fairs, even sometimes advertisements in print media or TV, radio. Now, there is this concept of recruitment branding. If you want to attract and retain the best workers, people have to see your company as a desirable place to work. Google, for example, is considered a very desirable place to work because how they pay their employees, the benefits that they offer, status. On the other hand, a place like Dollar Tree, probably not the most desirable place to work. And if anybody works at Dollar Tree, maybe you agree with me, maybe not, I don't know. But I don't think the pay is that great. I doubt the benefits are that great. I don't think the working environment is that great. right? So if you're trying to attract the best and brightest, you need to create this brand image that your company is a great place to work for, right? So how do you do that? That's something that HR can also be responsible for. Let's talk about the hiring process. Yeah, so if you've ever applied for a job, the process goes something like this. You submit your application, oftentimes on some website,
Indeed.com.
like Indeed.com. And if there's some interest, they might contact you for an initial interview. And usually you're then interviewing with somebody in human resources at that point. But then if they think you've got potential, then they might have you do more interviews. Just depends. They might have you do some kind of tests. Sometimes on the website where you apply, they have you do some like a math test or a language test or something. Or you might have to come in and do some kind of testing. I remember for one job I applied for decades ago, I had to go in and do a typing test. I didn't do very well. There might be, again, more interviews where you're actually interviewing with the direct manager, who would be your boss if you got hired. And then if they think you're a good candidate, they might have you do a background check, or they might do a background check on you where they're checking criminal history, if there is any. They're checking maybe your credit history, believe it or not. They might be calling your professional references, like your previous employers. Why do you think they wait and do all this stuff now instead of at the beginning? It takes time and money. Perfect answer. It does. It takes time and money. So they only do that with the candidates that seem like they have the best potential. Sometimes they have you do a drug test or a physical fitness test, depending on what the job is. And then if they actually decide to hire you, they make you an offer. You either accept it or negotiate. And if you and the employer come to an agreement, then great. Then you're hired and then you start the job, right? So it's a very involved process. For an entry-level job, from the time you apply until the time you start, it's often a couple weeks, maybe even a couple months. For a higher level job, that process could take a year in some cases. So this is the process that HR goes through in recruiting and selecting candidates. Again, they work together with management to make these decisions. Anybody have questions or comments? All right. Oh, when you're in an interview, some employers are really good at asking questions to really find out who you are. Because let's be honest, some people lie during interviews. Oh yeah, I've done that before, and I've got 10 years of experience or whatever. They'll make things up. And so one way that in an interview, an HR person or a manager can try to find out if you're really telling the truth is they ask you for specific examples. So instead of just saying, what do you think about customer service? You could say, oh, I think customer service is really important. You really need to take care of your customer. I mean, anybody could say that, right? So instead, they'll say something like, tell me about a time, God bless you, when you dealt with a difficult customer and you provided exceptional service. So then you have to think back and give them an example, and it's harder to fake. And those sorts of questions get into the actual behavior of the person, because then what they're looking for is, what was the situation? What action did you take and what was the outcome? And by asking those more difficult questions, they try to get some insight into who you are. They keep track with each candidate here's just an example where you have a whole bunch of different candidates, and these are the different things they're being evaluated on. So this way, you know, if you've done 10 interviews in a day, it's hard to remember them all, right? So you have to take really good notes if you're interviewing people. And that way you can go back and do a comparison and really try to figure out who did the best job of communicating why they were the right choice for the position. And it's not easy, I can tell you. I mean, I used to run a staffing agency. Our job was to find people to work in specific jobs. I had a team of recruiters, that's all that they did. And still, sometimes we recommended the wrong people. As hard as you might try to figure out who's going to do a good job, it's really, really difficult. Okay, let me just see where we're at here. Yeah, we're not going to get through all of the HR stuff today.
10:52.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to cover two more. Let me see. No, I'll come back to these two slides in a little bit. Let's do our video discussion. So as I mentioned earlier, training is part of the HR process. Sometimes within the human resources department, there will be a training department. And the role of the people in training is to make sure that all the workers know how to do their job, right? And they also need to make sure employees know how to do their job safely, know how to avoid things like sexual harassment in the workplace and discrimination. So the training department has to come up with a training program. And it has to think about what is it that we're trying to achieve, right? Again, making sure everybody knows how to do their job and do it safely and treat others appropriately. So once they identify the objectives, they create the training program. Just like your college instructors have to create the course that you're going to be going through. They have to create the training program. Then they have to actually conduct it, actually train people, and then continually see how's it going. Is it achieving its objectives? If the employees aren't learning, then there's something wrong, right? Or if things have changed, maybe there are some new laws employees need to know about, or new procedures, or new software, or new equipment, then you need to revise your training program, right? So when that happens, you get feedback, and then you go back and you revise your training program. So it becomes an ongoing cycle where you're always trying to be more and more effective in your training. Any questions or comments on training? We'll look at some different types of training. Sometimes you're trained on the job, meaning while you're working, you're also learning how to do the job. This was in the 1990s when I went to work for AT&T. And before that, when I worked for Nintendo, both of these large corporations would train you for a couple weeks before you started actually working. Back in those days, I was in customer service, working in call centers mostly. And so they would teach me about the company and its history, about the products, about how to talk to customers, about how to use the computer software. And it makes sense, right? An employee should learn all that stuff before they begin working. What I've noticed is that these days, companies don't provide as much training. And I think part of that is because they don't expect employees to stay around as long. They think like, why should we bother to train you if you're going to leave in 6 months? So a lot of companies bring people in and just throw them to their job. I've had situations where I got hired at a company and they basically say, here's your desk, get to work. And I'm like, oh, okay. Is there a way to log into the computer any help here? Can you tell me where I can get supplies? So these days, a lot of training is happening on the job. Some companies are using different types of simulation. This is a picture actually from Hartnell College. This is our Alice South campus where we have a simulator where you can learn how to operate, I don't know, a forklift or something. I'm not really sure, but he's using some sort of a big simulator instead of actually learning on the equipment, which could be dangerous and more expensive. Yeah, you got to be careful. So this would be an example of using a simulator. Pilots, for example, will first learn to fly in a simulator before they actually fly as part of their training, an actual plane. And these days with virtual reality, you could do a VR simulation, right? Where it's in 3 dimensions and you can, oh, it's already 11:05. Okay, and last thing, well, hold on, last thing. Also, some companies are having people do training online and at home, right? So that's another thing that's happening today. Okay, that's it. See you all.
I was